Good morning, everyone. Welcome. And thank you for joining our webinar today. Some of you might already be familiar with me, but my name is Mikey, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. So it's been quite a while since we've had a community webinar. I think almost 3 weeks just before the Raya holidays. So just before we start, just want to ask everyone how their holidays have been. I think we had the Raya holidays, in Malaysia at least. We had the Hari Raya holidays, the May Day, Labor Day holiday, as well as Vesak Day. Plenty of time for everyone to get some rest and eat their favorite foods. So you can just share in the chat here how your holidays have been recently. You can even summarize it in an emoji if you'd like, or even share an emoji of your favorite food that you had during the holidays. Food coma, definitely. I think I felt quite guilty sometimes because I did fast, but during the Raya holidays, I felt like I ate more than I actually needed. And yes, I definitely gained some weight as well. Luckily, I'm back on my exercise routine. It was quite hard to get back on from sleeping all the time and just eating. But yeah, it was a very good holiday. Lots of work catching up, yes. That's why the mind matters for this session. I'm sure a lot of us might be facing a bit of post-holiday blues, stress, getting back to work. 3 kilograms during Raya. Okay, so as we wait for more people to come in, I'm just going to share a bit of housekeeping for those who aren't too familiar with how our community webinars work. So this session is titled Mind Matters, Nurturing Mental Health in the Workplace, and I'll be joined by Naluri mental health coach, Alison Fernandez. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Demio is a very interactive platform. We encourage all our audiences to ask questions, participate in polls, and share your thoughts. We even have quite interesting debates within the chat tab on your right. You can also help out other audience members by giving them advice, your opinions and stuff, and your insights. If you'd like to ask Alison any question throughout the webinar, you can just type @Alison in the chat box. But if you want to remain anonymous and keep it private, there will be a little option after you type in @Alison, which you can tick. It says send as private message. At the end of the webinar, we'll also share her presentation deck as a PDF to be downloaded. And everyone that has registered, you will be able to receive a recording shortly after the webinar. So let me introduce Alison. Alison is a registered and licensed counselor who graduated with a master's in counseling psychology. She is passionate about empowering people through training and development. She taught psychology courses to undergraduate and postgraduate students for many years before joining Naluri as a full-time counselor. Over to you, Alison.
Hi, great morning. Thank you so much, Mikey. Thank you to my colleague. And I wish all of you all a great morning and a great day as we start today's webinar. One of the most important things before we move any further, I would like to invite you to grab a glass of water. I think we have all noticed that in the last couple of days or even weeks, the weather has been very, very hot. So I would encourage you to actually grab a glass of water as you hear me share a couple of things which definitely would be helpful. Thank you so much for your response and your replies in the chat room, and please keep that coming. It's great to see that you guys are responding, and that's probably the only way I know that I'm being heard. Yeah. So in terms of the content for today, I'll be talking about a couple of things, but to summarize it, firstly, would be really to understand what are stress and anxiety triggers. What are some of the signs and symptoms? We may be very common. We may have heard of this word stress. I think it's a word that's commonly used. Yeah. And anxiety. I think especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, we can hear of a lot of people talking about anxiety attacks. So we're here to also discuss what are some of the signs and symptoms of these, and also to learn about the impact of these stress and anxiety on us as individuals. And of course, more importantly, also to share some tips and discuss how can we start taking care of ourselves more holistically and to manage these stress levels better. Yeah. So I would like to ask you, for those of you who are with me, could you just type if you have heard of anything in this last, say, 2 weeks, if you have experienced any form of stress, or maybe you have heard of someone who has mentioned that they are going through some stress. Could you please type in the chat box 555? Wow, okay. So you can see that there's an overwhelming response. So even though, like Mikey mentioned earlier, we have been having quite a number of holidays, but it's either we have been experiencing some form of stress or anxiety, and or we have been hearing of someone who has complained that they are experiencing stress. And when we say stress, it could be from various parts of our life. It could be work related, it could be family related, relationship, and etc. So thank you so much for the response. Yeah, basically, what is stress? Yeah, so the most important thing that we want to understand is that stress is actually a state of worry or tension be a difficult event. So more often, we can see that people who complain of stress are because they have experienced something new that's taking place in their life. When there's a life-changing event, it could be a new job, it could be a new task given, or it could be maybe having a new child or just getting married. So that adjustment period can trigger some form of stress. And of course, sometimes it's interesting to note that it could be the event, or actually it could be the thought about the event itself. Yeah. So and that could trigger some feelings. So it's because you are feeling frustrated, you're angry, upset about something, or maybe even something as simple as feeling nervous because maybe you have to carry out a task that you're not familiar with. Yeah. So stress, of course, most often when we hear the word stress, I'm just going to ask you to type in the chat box, right? When you hear the word stress, what comes to your mind? Anything. You could put an emoji, you could share a word or a sentence. When you hear the word stress, what comes to mind? Thank you. So excellent. I've been seeing angry, work, uneasy, palpitations, a lot of things, when you have to manage a lot of things, tired, heavy workload, headache. Yes. Too many things on our mind. That's right. Sleeplessness, you want to give up, unhappy. Yeah. And finance, it is a big topic right now, right? That can trigger a lot of stress. So thank you so much for your response, and keep that coming. Yeah. While we may usually, if you notice even in the chat box, right, most of the time when we hear the word stress, it has a negative connotation. So most of the time our response would be, or our reaction would be something negative, or just like all the words that's mentioned in the chat box, right? But it's also important to notice that actually we as human beings, we do need a certain amount of stress in order for us to actually perform a task. So if you don't have any stress at all, that's also no good. That's the other extreme. So before I move any further, I just want to share with you that there are two types of stress. It could be eustress and what we call de-stress. So eustress is a positive stress that actually encourages you to carry out a certain performance. So what we want to do is ideally reach an optimum level of stress. Okay, so that's what it means, that it's necessary for survival. Yeah, so a certain form of stress is definitely necessary for survival. The other one is a potential source of anxiety. And if you can see here, the word that I highlighted is prolonged. When you are experiencing stress and you notice that it's taking for the same period of maybe 10 days to 2 weeks, 14 days, then you know that when that's prolonged, it can actually lead into anxiety. And that is actually an indication where we actually need to resort to professional help. So, as mentioned, what is then anxiety? So, anxiety is prolonged stress, which also may result in an increased blood pressure. So, you experience things like sweating, trembling, increase in heart rate. So, this is something, and some of these signs are some things that you mentioned earlier. Some of us actually shared in the chat box of what are our feelings when even we hear the word stress. Yeah. So I have a question. I will try my best to actually reply to your questions as you ask them, or I will actually answer and address the questions right at the end of the session, because some of your questions may be answered throughout my presentation in the next slide. Yeah. So is there any condition that we are not aware that we are in a state of stress? So if you see, just in a bit, I'm going to be discussing in terms of what are some of the signs and symptoms to look out for when we talk about stress and anxiety. Yeah. So, what contributes to stress and anxiety? What do you think that contributes to stress and anxiety? Before I explain, I would like to ask you to type in the chat box, what do you think contributes to stress and anxiety? Yes, so there's work pressure, overthinking, definitely. People around, yes, because of the environment, sometimes the environment, and that would fall under social. Yeah, so a lot of us are talking about work environment, people, high expectation, interesting. Our own mindset, right? Yes, fear of losing, things that you can't control, indeed. Uncontrolled emotions, low self-esteem, interesting, peer pressure. So a lot of the answers, they are related to, probably you can see that, please keep them coming, yeah, but you can see that all these answers or response that you're sharing can be sort of divided into these three categories. Yeah, so you have conflict, family issues, and this would fall, family issues, people around us, and this would fall under social, which is basically society, the environment that we are in, work environment, the social support. So a lack of social support can also contribute to stress and anxiety. Yeah. And of course, in terms of biological, it's just a natural state. So for some of us, it's that you either fight with the situation or you feel that you're too overwhelmed, that you need to just get away, you can't manage it anymore, that it's flight. And for some people, it is just a natural response to freeze. So they become numb, they feel that they can't move forward when they're experiencing stress. So this is in terms of biological, and last but not least, of course, psychological. And I believe that some of us mentioned, like you can see here, surrounding environment, which is the social expectation. So that will also fall under the belief system. And some of you also very interestingly mentioned our own thoughts. And sometimes we feel that we can't control everything around us. So that will fall under personality, and of course in terms of self-esteem. So some of us, we feel that, if we can't control a particular situation, or if we are not meeting certain expectations, then it has an effect on our self-esteem, and that also can contribute to stress. Yeah. And of course in terms of coping skills as well, so how can we cope better? And that's something that I'm going to be sharing about in a bit. Yeah. So as you see, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about these four different categories. So one will be in terms of physical, and of course in terms of emotional, in terms of behavior, as well as in terms of our own thought processes. Yeah. So if you can see here, The first one is in terms of physical symptoms. So some of us, we may be in this last 1 month or 2 months, yes, maybe we have not been experiencing any stress, or we know how to deal with it well. But what's interesting, the reason why I'm taking time to share about the symptoms is because we may have the people around us, our loved ones, or our colleagues, our friends, who are going through the symptoms and they don't even realize that they're actually experiencing stress or anxiety. Yeah. So in terms of physical symptoms, like earlier some of you asked, I think, does it affect memory? Yes, because it is very difficult to concentrate, and I will be covering that in a bit under cognitive. But if you look here, is in terms of headache. You can see stomach pain, and I have members who have been chatting with me through the app, and they do express that they go through some form of stomach discomfort. And as we talk further, we realize that it's actually related to the stress or anxiety that they are facing. Yeah. So there is also issues, there's also a relationship and a lot of research in terms of our digestive system and the cause of stress. Yeah. Of course, one of the more obvious signs when you're talking about anxiety, as I mentioned before, would be in terms of rapid breathing, shortness of breath, and such. Yeah. So if you have heard of anyone with such physical symptoms, can I just invite you to type yes? Yeah, so you just type yes. It could be you have experienced this maybe in this last 1 or 2 months, or maybe you have heard of someone who complained of this. Yeah, right? They say that they find it difficult to control their breath. They find it difficult to even maybe have a good appetite and such. Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the feedback. Yes, so we do see quite a number of them who are responding to us, and they're saying yes, they have either experienced it or they have heard of someone who have experienced it, right? So when you look at emotional symptoms, one of the thing is the mood fluctuation. So they feel that they're easily getting agitated, for example. So in short, right, they're easily triggered by anything, any changes or anything, random things that maybe before the trigger of the stress, they used to be fine with it, and suddenly now they realize that everything seems to be a problem. So even if you're dressed in a certain way, there's a problem. Or even if you are greeting this person who's experiencing stress or anxiety, the way, the tone, it could be anything that affects the mood, right? And then they have panic and fear. Most often, as we chat further with members who are experiencing stress, I notice that it's because of their own fear, their own thought processes that is creating that kind of stress. And yes, so like earlier, I like what Mikey did, where he asked you all to share a little bit about how the holiday season has been. Yeah. So for those who are experiencing stress, and if it's prolonged in anxiety, they actually find it very difficult to relax and stay calm. So this is definitely an indication of stress, or even if it's prolonged, then it's considered anxiety. Yeah. So usually what happens is that you can have actually a combination. So there is a question, yeah, if they, for some people, they have physical symptoms but they don't have emotional symptoms. And what does that mean? Well, for some people, they can have a combination of all, meaning they have emotional, cognitive symptoms, they have physical symptoms and such. But for some people, it could just be one category. Yeah. And that does mean that the person is still experiencing stress. How do we actually identify is, of course, for them to seek out to do some form of diagnostic testing. Yeah. So like in our Naluri app, we actually use DUS. Yeah. So that would be one of the forms to actually see what is the emotional state of the individual. And followed by the finding of the DUS, we actually have a chat and find out if something has happened in this last 1 to 2 weeks. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. And of course, just now I noticed that some of us mentioned about losing control. So we feel that there's too many things happening at the same time, and it's so hard to control or take charge of the situation. So as I move on, in terms of cognitive, right? Most welcome, Christine. So you see that there is racing thoughts, and this is getting more and more common, where when you are faced with too many things that's happening at the same time. So for example, when you're wearing, we all wear different hats. So for example, we are an employee, we are a child, we are a mother, we're a father, and we have different responsibilities. We can be a friend to someone. Some of us even have, we are also part of societies and clubs outside, so we carry certain positions. So there's so many different roles and responsibilities that we carry out. And that sometimes can get too frustrating or overwhelming, where we feel that there's just too much on our plate. For those of you who have had that kind of experience, can you please type, oh, yes, yes, yes. Yeah. So you feel that, yes, there are times where you feel that there's just too much on your plate and you don't know which one to concentrate on first. So thank you so much. So that actually is related to the cognitive symptoms, where we feel we can't manage our thoughts. And you know what's interesting is that we actually have close to about 6,500 to 7,000 thoughts in a day. And if it is hard sometimes for us to control those thoughts. And that's when I'm working with members through the app, I actually go down to pin down further and talk about and list down some of the roles and responsibilities that they have. And in that sense, it helps them to stay focused. So this is definitely one of the symptoms to look out for. And of course, this can trigger worrying and memory problems. So to answer to the question earlier, there was a question, if stress or anxiety can affect memory problems. Definitely it does, because one of the key thing is that you find it difficult to concentrate, and that affects the whole walks of it, which is difficulty for decision making, and in summary, you can't concentrate, and that definitely has an impact. Yeah. Thank you so much for all the feedback that's coming in the chat. I really appreciate that. And then we have behavioral symptoms. So this is something that is very easy to identify, and I'm going to take some time to share with you all. So one of the key triggers when I see members or I see clients for counseling, in my experience, it is always important to take note of basic requirements. When I say basic requirements, it's eating behavior. Yeah. And I believe that some of us may have had this experience. When you're going through something really hard, we find it hard to eat, where there's a loss of appetite, or we find ourselves overeating. Yeah. So if you have experienced this, please type yes, yes. Okay. And eating definitely, appetite definitely has a lot to do with our emotions. So the idea here is actually to check, as a counselor, what we usually do is to check if there is a change. Yeah. So for example, if you are a person who eats a certain amount of portion, you notice that, oh, I noticed that I'm unable to eat, for example, in this last 1 week. Okay. So yeah, it can be a habit. So you would know your pattern, right? Like how much would you eat? And this is exception to the holidays, and it's exception when you're celebrating, right? Like Hari Raya. Malaysians, I think, generally we love food, right? For those of us who love food, maybe you can put a happy emoticon. Okay. We roughly know what is our eating behavior like, right? And for those of you who love food, like I myself, I'm a foodie. But the thing is, when you see the pattern change, so the key term here is that, has it increased like drastically, and Raya is an exception, or is it because you just completely don't have appetite? So as a counselor, what I would look out for is like, how long has this been going for? So if it's just 1 or 2 days, then it's fine. I like how everyone is putting out that emoji and the heart shape as well. Thank you so much. So we are all foodies, right? High five to all the foodies. Yeah. And of course, in terms of behavioral changes, you would notice that sometimes we resort to substance abuse. And the question here is how much? yeah, and avoiding responsibilities. So if you look at the withdrawing from people and taking it out on others, so if you look at these behavioral symptoms, what we as counselors we want to look out for is that if you had a certain practice, a certain habit, and if that has changed now, then that is a sign or a symptom that we're looking out for. And how long? So typically, I think you would have heard me mentioning this a couple of times. If these behavioral symptoms have been carried out for more than 10 days to 14 days, then it's definitely a sign of concern where we actually encourage um, uh, members or clients to actually seek for professional help. So, yeah, I can see some of us mention here dark chocolate is good for stress, right? Yes. It actually works for many people, and I think it's because of what it helps in terms of the hormones that we need to feel good, to be happy. Yeah. So, yes. So, to move on, yeah. So, what are some of the symptoms and stress? We spoke a little bit about stress and anxiety, yeah, but I'm going to ask you once again. I remember asking you this question earlier, but now that we've gone through the 4 different categories, right, I'm just going to ask you very quickly to type out some of the symptoms of stress and anxiety which you have come across, maybe for yourself or for your loved ones. Yeah, it could be anything. It could be the behavioral symptoms, it could be the cognitive symptoms, it could be the social as well as emotional. These were the 4 topics that we spoke about earlier. Yeah, so thank you so much. Please continue seeing. So we can see here there's pressure, withdrawal from people. Yes, that's right. Racing thoughts, indeed. So there's headache, stomach ache. Yes, easily getting angry, migraine, digestive problems. Yes, extreme weight loss, that is definitely a sign that we need to look out for. Yeah, suicidal thoughts, that's even more serious. Yeah, and I hope that, you know, if you look at the statistics, I mean, as I read your reply, I'm just going to go through very quickly on suicidal thoughts. If you look at the statistics, I think there is a huge change, and the numbers of people having suicidal thoughts, especially from pandemic and post-pandemic, we can know that the statistics of people having suicidal thoughts has increased. And that's why it is very important for us to seek help, and if possible, professional help. So if we know or we hear of someone who mentions about suicidal thoughts, it's always good to encourage them to seek for professional help and to see how they can actually resort before it's too late. Yeah. So I can see here, so there's some of them who mention about memory loss, procrastination, that's right. Loss of interest for work, yes, and that is definitely a reason to have a chat, yeah, with someone who's professional, or if you have a good support system. So fatigue all day, yeah. And as you are typing out these symptoms, right, I think one of the key questions we need to ask is that how long is this feeling going on for? So if it's just 1 to 2 days and then it got better, then it's great. So remember, yeah, that what we want to do is we want to look out for the duration of this. Yeah, and if the individual is comfortable to have a chat, like for example, here in Naluri, we have our digital coaches, including myself. You can just have a chat and see how you're doing. And we also have some of our lessons which can help you to identify this. So what does prolonged stress do? It actually leads to burnout. I'm sure most of us are quite familiar with this term burnout. So very interestingly, let's see what are some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. Okay, so correct, burnout. Okay, so before I go into that, I'm going to ask you very quickly, for those of you who have heard or you have experienced or you have had your loved ones who have mentioned this word burnout, can you type burnout? Okay, So we can see in the chat room, it's all buzzing and everyone is typing out burnout. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing that. Yeah. So as you're typing that, we're going to quickly discuss what are some of the signs and symptoms of burnout. So if you look at the signs, we can see here, I think one of us mentioned about fatigue. So this is chronic fatigue where you're unable to wake up, you're unable to do anything on a daily basis. And this could be basic requirements, like I mentioned, in terms of eating, in terms of sleeping, and carrying out daily responsibilities. Yeah. Regularly losing sleep, so that is definitely an indication for burnout. And of course, we mentioned fever, loss of appetite and such. One of the symptoms, yeah, there is two extremes. So if you see here, there is mention of a overcommitment or disengagement. So it's both extremes. So one is overcommitment where they're constantly doing more than is required. That means they are unable to take a break. And it's so important for us as individuals to take that break. Yeah. And of course, in terms of disengagement, this is basically withdrawing and unresponsive and difficulty finding enjoyment. So they are unable to actually do the things that they used to do to help themselves calm down. Okay. So insomnia, yes. What can we do about insomnia? I'm going to be actually covering a little bit of tips on how we can do self-care. And if you have questions, maybe I can address them in a while. Yeah. So this is the most important question. How can we manage, now that we are familiar with what is stress, what is anxiety, what are some of the signs and symptoms? So we spend the first half of the presentation today discussing on that, right? And we notice that quite a number of us are familiar, and we notice that we have either experienced these signs and symptoms, or we actually know of our loved ones who have experienced these signs and symptoms. So the second part, which is the more exciting part, yeah, is to ask ourselves, how can then we manage stress and anxiety better? So I'm going to be sharing a few tips, which I feel would definitely answer some of your questions that you have put. How can we deal with insomnia? How can we maybe help with memory loss and such? Yeah. So there is a question, is that healthy to ignore someone or issue happen around us in order to avoid stress? Of course, I think this would fall under the category of having control. So if we have a loved one or a colleague or someone has come to us with a difficulty, and we ourselves get affected by it, then that's a sign that we need to maybe refer them to get professional help, or to refer them to seek the help from someone else. Yeah. So I think it's not so much about we intentionally ignoring it, but I think as individuals, we know our capacity, and we need to recognize how much control do we have to help an individual. Yeah. So I will be talking about these four different things. One is deep breathing, and of course, mindfulness. Interestingly, self-care, which is one of my favorite topics, and our healthy habits. Yeah. So in terms of deep breathing, for those of you who have heard about deep breathing, can I get you to type there in the chat box, deep breathing? So it's either you have heard of it, or you have practiced it, or you are still practicing it. Please type deep breathing. So deep breathing is definitely something which is very, very important. While it may sound very simple, but it actually helps us to calm down. And what we want to do in deep breathing is to stop everything else for a moment, to close our eyes, and to actually focus a lot in terms of our own breathing, our own blood flow, because when we are overwhelmed, it's very easy for us to forget even to breathe effectively, and that is so important. Yeah. So thank you so much for sharing. Like yoga, yes, yoga And of course, trying to understand how to practice this. It's actually a very simple tool. So you can see in the screen in front of you. Basically, we want to inhale. We want to practice that, yeah. And then we want to hold for 6 seconds and then exhale. So when we do this, usually we want to have at least 5 sets. We want to do 5 sets of this, where we want to stay focused in terms of our breathing and how our blood flow actually works. Because when we breathe better, what happens is that the oxygen level then is transmitted, and our whole body is able to get enough sufficient oxygen for us to have through our blood flow, and that definitely helps with all the physical symptoms that we spoke about earlier. Yeah, so it's a simple exercise. Maybe I can invite you to try out one of the sets if you can. I would like you now, for those of you who are with me, can you just type 555? Okay, so I know that you're still tuned in and you're still with me. So what we're going to do in a short while, thank you so much for those of you who are responding. I'm just going to go through with you this deep breathing exercise. So what we're going to do is basically, thank you so much for those of you who are typing. I'm going to invite you to slowly, as you get comfortable, yeah, I want you to slowly close your eyes, and just focus on your breathing. Okay, so I want you to close your eyes, and as you're closing your eyes, I want you to inhale, yeah, the air through your nose. So you close your mouth and you inhale the air through your nose, and I want you to count till 6. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and I want you to slowly exhale through your mouth. So you breathe out through your mouth and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Can? So for those of you who got it, just type yes, 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 yes. Okay. Mati tahan nafas. Alamak. Okay. So over practice, you will get better at it. Yeah. Maybe we can do it once more. Okay, we're going to do it once more. I want you to close your eyes again. Thank you for typing in the chat box. So I'm going to invite you to close your eyes again. And I want you to concentrate on, you're going to start to inhale, yeah? So everyone close your eyes and inhale the air through your nose. Inhale the air through your nose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then exhale. So you let go the air through your mouth. And we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is one set. Thank you so much. You can open your eyes right now. So due to time constraints, we can't continue. But what we would encourage is that you can do this. So what I did was about 2 sets. You can try doing this. You can try doing 5 sets of this. And you can notice that your breathing will be better. Thank you so much for the response. So maybe, yes, you can share how did that feel, even though we just did 2 sets, right? Maybe some of you can share your feedback. How did that feel? Okay, just doing it. For you, those of you who could not follow me, it's okay. But this would be one of the practice that you can do. So this is what we mean by deep breathing. Yeah, so I had a reply. This is how I calm down my son. It's true. So I have a daughter who's 3.5 years old, and I think in their nursery, they have already started teaching them how to do this. So usually when I'm trying to have a conversation with her that she doesn't like, she would actually start telling me to do deep breathing. Yeah, so it's interesting to take note. Yeah, so The next thing we want to do is, thank you so much for all your feedback in terms of how the deep breathing exercise helped you. The next thing we want to look into is mindfulness and focus. So like earlier, some of us mentioned about the symptoms, right? We can't focus. Sometimes we feel too tired. There's low self-esteem, or for example, lack of motivation to just carry out the task for the day. So having this mindfulness and focus actually helps. So number one, when you talk about intentional, as you can see in the picture, it's really about understanding the goal of the day. So what is your big goal? What is your short-term goal? What do you want to, what do you want to do to help that situation? Yeah. And the other thing is in terms of here and now. So when you talk about here and now, I think one of the most important things we want to focus on is sometimes we are so overwhelmed and caught up by what is stressing us out. So for example, if there's heavy workload or there's something that is to be completed by the end of the day, or for example by the next day, we tend to ignore what's around us. So what to do here and now means to just look around you and to feel in that presence. Another tip is that some people, they are too stressed thinking about what has happened in the past, which we can't go back to, or what is going to happen in the future. So what this actually helps us to do is to take charge and take control of what they can start doing now. Yeah. So thank you so much for your feedback, but due to time constraints, I'm just going to speed up a little bit, and maybe I can start addressing your questions once I'm done. Yeah. So the other thing is to have an environment which is non-judgmental. And this is very important in terms of your support system, or to just have someone that you can talk to. So to go into that space or that environment where you feel supported and not being judged. Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, one of my favorite topics, and constantly this is what I've been doing as a digital coach and as also as a consultant here in Naluri, is to remind people on the importance of self-care and just to do the things that we enjoy. Because when we start focusing our energy, it doesn't have to be long periods of time, but it could be something that we do just for 10 to 15 minutes a day, which is going to bring up our energy level. And the whole idea behind self-care is really for us to actually have a balance in terms of our hormones. So one of the best things is to do exercise. And I'm going to ask those of you who are doing exercise, could you please type exercise in the chat box? For those of you who are doing regular exercise, well done. For those of you who intend to do exercise, so hopefully after this session, you realize how important it is. It's interesting to note, thank you so much to all those of you who are replying, but I'm just going to share with you, right, that exercise actually helps us to balance our hormone. So what happens is that when we exercise, there is a certain level of hormones that is released by our body, which actually helps us to reduce anxiety, stress, and depression. Yeah. So it is an energy booster. So rather than, spending money on things, exercise is free. It just requires a little bit of discipline. Yeah. Intent is from January itself. It's okay. It's not too late. We are in May. What I would encourage you to do is actually to start at least for the first 15 to 30 minutes. Yeah. You can maybe tune in to doing things that you like. When we say exercise, it could be badminton, it could be sports, or it could even just be walking in the park. Yeah. And one of the things that helps is maybe to put on a headset and listen to a music that you like that can help you to calm down. Okay. And then moving forward is, of course, in terms of diet. So it's interesting to take note, yeah, that actually we have our dietitian, our in-house dietitians available in the app, and you can see that there are certain foods that actually help us to have better moods and better hormones to manage with stress and anxiety. So the examples provided in this slide, of course, is in terms of magnesium, how it helps with the brain and heart, in terms of fiber, like earlier we mentioned about our gut health, right? and also in terms of protein. So protein actually helps with treating anxiety and depression. So there are some examples which is given in the slide, which will be passed to you shortly. And you could also actually use the food journal. So what we have is that we have this part of this application where you can take a picture of your food and you can put it in the food journal and have questions and a chat with our in-house dietitian. Yeah. And this will actually help you to understand how to have a balanced diet and how that actually has an effect in coping with stress and anxiety. Okay. So moving on would be sleep. Yeah. So this is definitely a very important indication. We all need sleep and quality sleep. So usually it's recommended to have a sleep for about 7 hours. So this definitely helps us in terms of our cognitive symptoms earlier that we mentioned about. It also helps us generally because we tend to be able to focus better and tend to also have a healthy mind and a healthy outcome throughout the day. Yeah. So we have what we call a Naluri sleep journal to help you monitor your sleep patterns. And we also have lessons on sleep hygiene and etc. So if you are interested, you just go into our app. You actually can click to the lessons and you will find all these different lessons that will help give you some tips on how to improve. Because earlier I noticed that some of you mentioned in the chat group about insomnia and how to cope with that. So maybe that could be a startup for you to try out some of our sleep lessons. Yeah. And support system. So I cannot emphasize this further. Yeah, I noticed that this is something that has really helped a lot of people, especially in the time of COVID. More of us started to realize that we are social beings and we really need to have that sense of connection with another person. So thankfully, in a way, we have technology at that point of time. So there were a lot of people who were reaching out to counseling services and chat groups or attending mental health talks, which I was actually delivering throughout the COVID session. And that period of time, one of the things that I mentioned is that we really need to know our people. What we mean here by support system is to actually be able to have healthy relationships with people, and also to know who are the people that we can have a chat with if we're going through a difficult situation. And these are people who would not judge us, but mostly be there to just listen to us. Yeah. Of course, the other thing is in terms of our spiritual self. So for us to have a higher purpose, to identify what can improve our self-confidence. And of course, being human, we can't run away from challenges. So nurturing that spiritual self actually helps you to overcome or at least feel that sense of confidence that you can go through life challenges. Yeah. So self-care is definitely very, very important. Prioritizing yourself is not selfish. So before I end, I would just like to remind you that we all need to practice self-care. Even if it's just 15 minutes in a day, it's a very good start. Yeah. So one of the examples that I always give people is our mobile phone, right? We all have mobile phones and we know that no matter how much we charge our mobile phones, it can only last to 100%, right? Immediately after that, what happens? The battery dies, right? We have to put the phone in a charger. So I like to relate to this example because even a phone which has no emotions, no feelings, even a phone needs to be charged. And to me, I always share with people that is self-care is actually how we can recharge ourselves. How can we just switch off for a while and take care of ourselves in order for us to be fully functioning after that. So I hope you have a great day, and I hope whatever that I've shared is helpful for you. And I hope that you would start practicing some of the tips that I've mentioned. If you need further assistance, you can always drop us a chat. through our chat. You can have a talk with our fitness coach, our dietitians, or even our mental health coaches. Yeah. So before I end, just to summarize, earlier we spoke about some of the triggers of stress and anxiety, the signs and symptoms, to understand how it's actually impacting us. Sometimes we don't even realize that these are the signs and symptoms which is an indication to stress and anxiety. Last but not least, most importantly, we spoke a little bit about some of the simple tips that we can start practicing in order for us to take care of ourselves better. Yeah. So with this, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you found this session beneficial. Before I end, I would also like you to probably do a simple lesson. I will maybe get help from Mikey to share. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So as you can see, Mikey will be sharing. Yes, it's there, the stress levels and stress mindset lesson. So you can find this actually in our app, and I encourage you to take that lesson to understand better. So thank you very much, and continue to have a pleasant day.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison, for the excellent presentation and for everyone engaging. We love all the comments coming in and the discussions being held in the comment section. So now we are at the Q&A session. Just before we start the Q&A session, I know it's already close to 12, so some of you might want to go off to lunch a bit earlier. So I'll be sharing the presentation deck for those that would like to have a copy. It's available on the handout tab on your right. And we also like some feedback of the presentation, what you thought of me, what you thought of Alison, anything we can improve on in the future, which I am sharing. There you go, on the left. Please do leave us some feedback. Okay, so now we're at the Q&A session. Alison, I'm going to ask you some questions that were asked during the registration process first, before we get to any questions that were asked during this webinar.
Sure.
In the meantime, if anyone has any questions that I answered, please do write it in the chat box right now, and we'll get to it soon. Okay, so quite a few of the questions were already addressed throughout your presentation. But first one is it normal if I don't really feel stressed out?
Oh, thank you for the question, Mikey. And before I answer that question, right, I would like to thank you so much for all your feedback in the chat. And yes, once again, thank you for your participation. So is it normal to not feel stress? I think that's yes. The answer is yes, it is normal. But like I mentioned in the start of my presentation, we have two types of stress. So one is actually the eustress, which is a positive stress, which actually helps us to wake up and actually get our task carried out. So the idea here is to have an optimum level of stress, rather than maybe we don't realize it. Maybe we are having eustress more than de-stress. Of course, most of my presentation today covered on topics related to de-stress, which is when it's prolonged and when it has an effect. But it's always good to also take note that some level of stress actually helps us to get the job done. And that is called optimum level of stress. So ideally, we want to reach that level. Yeah, I hope that answered the question, Mikey.
Yeah, I'm sure the person who asked the question, they probably have experienced stress before, but they weren't even aware they were having the symptoms. Could have been the emotional, could have been physical, but thanks to your presentation, hopefully they now understand when they are facing stress, because it happens to everyone and it's unavoidable.
That's right.
Okay. Next question, more related to the office. So if you were to be stressed, how would you communicate with people you perceive to have huge egos when you are the introvert in the office?
Okay, so I think one of the great initiatives is, like, for example, even in the office, I'm sure you have people, your support system. I think it was covered in one of the last part of my presentation. Your go-to people, the people that you are comfortable with, you feel less judged. So sometimes just having a conversation with them, it's interesting to know that that itself is therapy. But of course, like you mentioned, of course, if the ego is too high, or you feel that you don't want people you know to know that you're going through stress, that's when we actually recommend therapy. So it could be through physical counseling, or it actually could be remote therapy, or it could be just having a chat. Like for example, in here in Naluri, we have the digital coaches like myself. So you can just have a chat with us, like, this has been something that's bothering me. And the chat is very easygoing. So it's not like a full 30 minutes or a 1 hour session. Sometimes I've had experience where, they drop me the chat, and then maybe after 2-3 hours, when they have their free time, they get back to the chat with me. So maybe this would work out for individuals who are going through that situation.
Yes, and the Naluri app's always available. You can always call in the hotline as well if you do feel any intense anxiety or stress.
That's right.
Okay, so let's get to some of the live questions. There was a few before about exercise. Will Naluri provide virtual exercise sessions? Yes, we do. We actually have free workout videos available on our website. If you go on the website, it's available under resources, and you can find a variety of exercise workouts. It can be HIIT workouts, yoga, or even we have audio guides as well that can help you through that. Okay. What is a good time to exercise? And between 30 minutes of exercise and perhaps additional 30 minutes of sleep, which one should we prioritize? Which is more important in combating stress?
Okay, so in terms of exercise, I think what helps is that the purpose behind having that exercise, number one, is to have that hormonal balance, because that can directly affect our sleep level. But if, for example, we have no difficulty sleeping, and we feel that we're ready to just switch off everything else and go to sleep, I think, of course, the priority then would be to sleep first, because the whole idea is that you don't want to exercise and immediately go to sleep. I think there needs to be some form of a break in between. So, of course, it's encouraged to exercise, correct me if I'm wrong, early in the morning, ideally, or I think it's usually after work. Yeah.
There's quite a few about insomnia. What's the best food you would recommend to overcome insomnia? They also ask about supplements, but at Naluri, we don't really recommend supplements, as it works differently for everyone. So if you are to take supplements, please do consult your doctor first. But in regards to this webinar, Alison, are there any foods you would recommend to help overcome insomnia?
I think to summarize like earlier, I think one of the diets that we want to see, especially during our dinner meal, right, would be to include foods that have higher protein, because that actually helps us to calm down better, and it helps with the neurotransmitters. So another way to help, to be honest, would be maybe we could take a picture of the food that we want to consume and actually have a chat with our dietitian, because they will be able to give us a clear description of how a combination of certain food can help us to sleep better. Yeah, so you can put that in the food journal, and you actually get to chat with our in-house dietitians. Yeah.
So I think it's good to be wary of when you are eating as well.
That's right.
I think in previous webinars that was about diet, we recommended people not to eat so close to sleeping time, because it can actually affect your quality of sleep. You might still have long sleep, but it might not be good sleep, because food actually affects your, I think it's called REM. Is that right?
That's
Alison?
right.
Your rapid eye movement.
Yes.
It's when you fall into deep sleep. So it goes through a curve, and you want to maintain it optimally. So if you eat too much sugary food close to your sleeping time, it can affect it quite badly.
That's right.
Next, sorry. you can continue.
I was just going to add on because the thing is like everything else, right? So when we consume food, and I like that you mentioned sugary food, the body has work to do to break it down and such. So there is an active work in our body, whether we realize it or not. So that's why it's encouraged that it's better to have our dinner at least like 3 to 4 hours before we actually go to sleep, because then the body's actively cutting down and burning out all the food processes. And by the time we actually head to sleep, there's no active so-called movement for all this to take place. Yeah.
Correct. Okay. Next question. How long would you consider withdrawing from people is until it becomes quite concerning?
Okay. So for me, I think
I assume due to stress.
yeah, and I think for me, the general rule of thumb would be 10 days, 10 days to 2 weeks. If it's regular, like every day, there is a conscious effort to withdraw from people. Sometimes it's just that because we have so many things to do, we are fine, everything else is fine in our life. It's just that we're concentrating to settle a task, then that's fine. But if you are consciously withdrawing from people and you don't want to have any connection with anyone, then I think 10 days to 2 weeks would be a good indication.
Right. Also, Alison mentioned before that Naluri actually does have a DAS assessment to calculate your depression, anxiety, and stress. For those of us that are still online, I'd like to share a link to it if you would like to take the assessment. It'll be very helpful to understand your own depression, anxiety, and stress levels before you connect with a Naluri coach or your own therapist. Okay. Another question. We have one from Sashela. What would you recommend the best way to handle procrastination is? I'm assuming at work as well.
Yeah. Or actually procrastination in general. I think what helps a lot is actually having a list of things to do. So like I mentioned, right, we are usually overwhelmed with too many thought processes. So one of the key tip that we give in therapy sessions, or even when I chat with some of the members, I tell them that journaling or writing things down actually helps. So we do have a journaling part in our app. We can use that tool to list down the things that we need to accomplish, so that actually when we start the day, which is sometimes quite hard, right? We feel tired or lethargic and we are like loss of motivation. So having a look at that list to accomplish kind of like helps us to get started, and that will help us with procrastination. Yeah.
Great. Yes. Quite I wouldn't say, well, yeah, maybe personal question from Christine. She's tried everything from proper balanced meals, exercise, but she still suffers from insomnia. So do I as well. Insomnia is quite hard to get over. And despite trying all sleep hygiene routines, we still cannot get quality sleep. Is there any advice you would give, Alison? I know it varies from people. It depends on their external factors as well.
Okay.
But in general, is there anything you could advise?
I honestly think that having a chat with someone like myself, a professional, usually I think what I would like to do is to help go through some of the thought processes, because sometimes we don't realize, but we're actually beating ourselves too much. That's one. And since it's mentioned here that there is a try of all the sleep hygiene routine, right? Then it's more of what we're saying to ourselves before we go to sleep. How do we actually calm ourselves down, or what are we doing? So for that, I think one good indicator would be to have an exploration of the thought processes, and from that we can actually see if really what are some of these thoughts that's stopping us from falling asleep. Yeah.
Yeah. Related to this question, there was another question asked about caffeine, actually, because I'm sure a lot of us drink caffeine and it works for us differently. One coffee for me is fine. If I start having more than one, then I do start exhibiting anxiety symptoms. I'll be like sweating, can't really sleep, stressed over nothing. So this person's asked, do you have any alternatives to replace caffeine? I'm assuming to keep us energized throughout the day.
Yeah, and to be honest, I think it's one is of course preference. Like a lot of people, they feel they have already put it in their mind. So sometimes it works like a placebo, right? I really need to have that coffee to get me going. But of course, there is a lot of effect in terms of caffeine intake, and there is a certain number of amount that is recommended. Anything more than that can actually trigger the other way. So anything in the extreme actually has a counter effect, right? Um, of course, if you ask me, I would say you could replace it with just water. But I think at the start of my presentation, I spoke about drinking water, but I don't think everyone can accept that. Like you're asking me to replace coffee with water. But I think generally that really helps to keep that balance. Water, or of course, if not water, then fresh juice without sugar. That also helps. Yeah.
Yes, Michelle asks, can we use tea as an alternative? I think tea still has caffeine, doesn't it?
Yeah, I can't really remember, but I remember quite some time back coming across an article which mentioned tea has higher caffeine. But that's subject
Yeah,
subject to argue. I don't take
of
tea at all,
course.
so I'm not really sure. But you are right. Definitely tea also has caffeine in it. Yeah.
Yeah. If I recall correctly, especially matcha tea, which is like really concentrated green tea. So it actually has more caffeine than a normal cup of coffee. But if you do want to find out if whatever you're drinking has caffeine content in it, because some teas might not, like chamomile tea and such,
That's right.
just check on the packaging. It will tell you the amount of caffeine content available in your drink. Okay, we're coming to the last question, but please do ask Ernie if you would like to get some in just before we wrap up. But before that, I'll just do one more question. Is burnout equivalent to paranoia, and what are the differences?
Okay. So for burnout, it's usually related to prolonged stress, meaning it has come to a point where you feel that you are disengaged, you are unable to move on. So there's that, like I mentioned, the overcommitment or the disengagement. So you feel that you constantly need to be working on something. The whole idea behind burnout is really that you are unable to take that self-care tips, even if it's basic tips, right? You're unable to do that. That's when you realize you're really burnout. But for paranoia, it's more to do with thought processes, because it could be a certain particular situation that is causing you to feel anxious, or you're feeling fear. So usually paranoia is to deal with a lot of fear, or we need to specify and see a particular situation that is triggering that situation. So in general terms, I think that's the difference lah. Yeah.
Okay, great. It doesn't seem to be any more questions coming in, so I think it might be a good time to wrap up. Alison, is there anything else you would like to say just before I do my closing remark?
No, just thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. I really hope that this has been helpful. Once again, let me just remind you that maybe some of the self-care tips that I mentioned was very simple things that maybe you would have heard of. But what I want to encourage you to do is to really sometimes just take, not sometimes, if can daily, just at least 10 to 15 minutes and recharge yourself, because it can do wonders for you. Yeah, that's all from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison. I hope all of us can have learned from today's session and are able to implement the tips and exercises Alison has shared throughout the presentation. For those of us that are still online, please don't leave just yet, because as I'm about to close the room, you'll actually be redirected to our feedback form, and we'd love as much feedback as we can. So thank you, everyone. We really appreciate everyone being here. Be sure to visit the Naluri community website if you're interested or want to know more about our future webinars. You can find articles, more assessments, and even previous webinars, as well as workout videos. And thank you, everyone. We'll see you at the next webinar. Bye.
Goodbye.